Hi there, my name is Sean Sandrock and I'm a current student at Eureka College. As you know, we usually hold an annual dinner for President Reagan's birthday. However, with the recent surge in COVID cases in central Illinois, we were unable to do so in person. So we decided to interview Edwin Meese III, our guest speaker. Ed graciously agreed to sit down with me and Abby Sothman, the chairperson of Eureka College's alumni board, to talk a little bit about President Reagan's life and legacy and his leadership skills throughout his presidency. I hope you enjoy this conversation. All right, so I'll kind of start us off with a first question. Mr. Meese, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you started, stuff throughout your life, and then kind of what you're doing nowadays.
I was born in 1931 to a middle-class family in Oakland, California. My mother was an ordinary housewife. My dad worked in the courts, and then later was the elected treasurer of our county. And I went to public schools, then I went to Yale University for college, and then to the Boalt Hall, which was the University of California Law School at Berkeley. And my first job was as a deputy district attorney, and I was doing that when I met Ronald Reagan. Since that time, of course, I served for him in a number of capacities over the years, and you'll probably be asking me more about that. And then most recently, I've been with the Heritage Foundation, which is a public policy think tank, if you will, in Washington, D.C., where I'm now the Ronald Reagan Distinguished Fellow Emeritus from that organization. That brings me up to date.
That's great. And when you first met Ronald Reagan, what was it that drew you to him?
Well, it was interesting. I was working in the district attorney's office, as I mentioned, and I was not looking for a job. I liked the job I had, but I was asked to come up and meet the new governor-elect. This was after he had been elected, before he took office it was in 1966. He was about to become governor in 1967. So I went up and I met him, and we talked for about a half hour, and I was so impressed with him for a couple of reasons. One, his friendly manner and genial personality, and also the fact that he knew a lot about things that I knew very much about, which was criminal law, law enforcement, that sort of thing. So at the end of that half-hour meeting, he surprised me by offering me a job, and I surprised myself by accepting. And I remember having to drive home 75 miles from the state capital to my home to explain to my wife that we were going to be moving to Sacramento, to the state capital. And she agreed that we should. And so that's how I got started with him.
That's great. So since you did start talking about the governorship in California, what kind of shaped Ronald Reagan during that governorship into the great leader that he was later on in his life?
Well, I think he was already a leader. You know, from his earliest days, he had been a leader. He was a leader in his high school. He was, I believe, president of a student body at Eureka while he was in college. And then he was in the Army. He was an Army officer during World War II. And then he was actually, even as an actor, he was a leader. He was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, which he, as he said, was basically his union. And so he had a lot of experience as a leader. But I think as governor, he had a new dimension to his leadership, and that was to major political leadership, which he mastered very well, including dealing with a legislature that was in the hands of the opposition party.
He certainly was a great communicator. And I think one thing we learn in the Reagan Fellowship Program at Eureka College is President Reagan's style of servant leadership. And I think that's something that stuck with me throughout my life. And I was wondering if you could speak to that and how he led through servant leadership.
Well, his leadership included several things. Number one, he had a vision of where he wanted to go and what he wanted to do. And secondly, as a leader, he was able to communicate that vision to the people who worked for him. And once they had the idea of where he wanted to go, he left them to themselves to figure out how to get there. He was not a boss who kept looking over your shoulder. He expected you to do your job and to attain the objectives that you and he were both seeking. So it was the other thing is, once you acted, he always stood behind you. So he was a very good good boss from beginning to end, telling you what to do, letting you do it, and then standing up for behind you to be sure that you had backing and support.
I'm going to kind of switch gears from I first asked about the governorship, now to the presidency. What was it like working as the counselor to the president and then later for the next 4 years as the Attorney General of the United States?
Well, it was a great experience. Obviously, the scope of the national government was much greater than that of the governorship, but he handled that. The transition from one to the other was amazing how well he handled that. He had already experienced with a legislature that was in the hands of the other party, and he was able to negotiate and to work out ways in which he and the people on both parties could work together. And he did that, of course, when he was president, as he had when he had been governor. And also, again, he had a vision of where he wanted to go. For example, he knew how he wanted to handle the Soviet Union. He knew where he needed to go in this country in dealing with restoring the economy. And also, he had this ability to revive the spirits of the American people. In 1981, when he took office, the country was in bad shape. We were in serious trouble economically. We had stagflation and great recession. We the previous administration had spent a great deal of money, so that we were in deep financial problems. We had the situation of the Soviet Union around the world, very aggressive, and he had an idea of how to handle them. He had a strategy for each of these things, including reviving the spirit of the American people, which he did really by his frank and honest talk with the people. And he was able to communicate his ideas to them and explain how, through his strategies, we were going to have a better day in this country, which in fact we did, and he brought the people along with him. So working in that very vigorous and very active and energetic administration with some great people that he had hired, who he had appointed, it was a great experience for all of us.
Mr. Meese, I was thinking if you could tell us a little bit about maybe one really fond memory of a very vivid memory of President Reagan.
Well, there were a lot of good memories about him personally, including times when he showed his great friendship and what a great person he was individually. But I think the most inspiring moment that I can remember was in 1982. We had flown into Germany and to West Germany, and as really we were at the spot at the Tempelhof airport, and that was literally the dividing line between the Soviet-dominated totalitarian world and the free world, which West Berlin represented. And that's right at that line. I remember flying in and standing there. They had drawn up the troops in an honor guard from the United States, United Kingdom, and France, and to stand next to him as they played the Star-Spangled Banner, and was realizing that I was standing next to the leader of the free world, literally on the dividing line between the free world and the totalitarian world. And that's an image that I'll continue to carry with me of Ronald Reagan and his leadership.
I'll keep going with that. Since we talk about his great leadership and being able to stand alongside the leader of the free world, you have to be a good speaker, and as we all know, Ronald Reagan was the great communicator, and he kind of got that nickname, or not that nickname here, but he started it here at Eureka, giving his first ever speech in our chapel here. So I just wanted to ask you, in your opinion, what made him such a captivating speaker?
Well, I think it was many things. First of all, he, as an actor, it was not just giving a speech, it was trying to elicit a response from his audience. And he knew that. So he would talk in ways that resonated with the people he was talking to. And for example, he would speak, was able to simplify very complex issues in ordinary terms that people would understand. And also he used a lot of stories. He used a lot of jokes to illustrate things so that people would remember them. And so it was his ability to elicit a response from people and his understanding of his audience that made him a great speaker. Plus, he, as I say, his sense of humor went a long ways towards making him a very entertaining speaker as well.
I have a little follow up on that. Since you brought up the stories and the jokes, do you have a favorite joke or quick story that Ronald Reagan would tell quite often?
Well, there were a lot of jokes, but the one I remember best was a joke that he played on me. In 1985, I had just been appointed Attorney General, and the president was flying to California for some purpose, and I was too. So he invited me to be with him on Air Force One, and also on Air Force One was my predecessor, Bill Smith, who was the outgoing Attorney General, and he was going home to California. And so on this particular day, as we were flying, both Bill and I had been working very hard right up until the time we left. And so we were in this section in Air Force One, which was reserved for the cabinet. And we were there. It has two big armchairs and then a sofa. So we were sitting in the two armchairs with our jackets off and fell sound asleep, both of us. And Ronald Reagan saw this, and unbeknownst to us, he summoned the White House photographer who was on board and took a picture of us. And about a week later, I get this picture of the two of us sitting there, sound asleep, and under it he described, he said, "Dear Ed, see, I told everyone you could do Bill's job, and here's the proof. Signed, Ron." That was pretty typical of his kind of impish, very humorous way of handling things.
I wonder if it was, you mentioned his humor that added to his style of leadership, but also he was known for bringing vastly different viewpoints together to achieve a common goal. And I wonder if it was that humor and what else played into allowing him to accomplish these major goals of bringing people together.
It really goes back to his early days in the movie industry when he was president of the Screen Actors Guild. He had to negotiate with the heads of the studios and with others, getting contracts for his fellow workers and so on. And one of the things was he always had respect for the people on the other side. And he recognized that, as he told me one day, he said, not only you have to get something out of the negotiation for your followers, but the other guy has to get something also to take back to his. And so it was that spirit of how to work together and find a common ground and find a common agreeable solution. Might not be everything you wanted, certainly not everything they wanted. At the same time, it was enough so that you could work together and be reasonably satisfied when you went back that your followers would agree with what you had done in the negotiations on their behalf. So it was this respect for others, particularly, even if they were opponents, political opponents or economic opponents, the respect for them, not disparaging them, not belittling them, and not being unreasonable in what you were asking. I think all of these qualities made him a very good person to bring people together and find a common, reasonable solution.
That's great. So I get to ask some of the fun questions here today. I'm originally from Tampico, where President Reagan was born, and I've been giving tours of his birthplace for quite a few years now. And so I always think about what President Reagan was like. So what are one or two or three words that kind of describe who President Reagan was?
Well, I think the words I would use are friendly and honest, a man of integrity, words like that, as well as one about being a very hard worker. He did work very hard in everything that he did, even though sometimes he just made it look easy.
Is there like an important life lesson that you learned from President Reagan that you've carried on even through till today?
Well, I think one was the one that I mentioned earlier, and that is having respect for other people. In other words, wherever they are on the economic ladder, wherever they are in terms of their position, it was having respect so that you could deal with people as a friend or as a person, at least seeking a common solution. And I think it was this trait, as well, of course, as being a friend, being friendly, and also being humble. Ronald Reagan never thought of himself as better than anybody else. He thought of himself as a person who wanted to get along with others and to accomplish his goals, but also working well with the people, as a leader, with the people working for him, as well as the people he was working for. And of course, the people he was working for as president was the people of the United States. He never forgot that that was who he was representing, and that's who was the ultimate beneficiary of his efforts.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson because I think his respect for people and it kind of started very young and he kept that all throughout his life, even here at Eureka College. And uh, I'll bring a question up of Eureka College. When he started here in 1928, everybody knew him as Dutch Reagan. No one knew him as Ronald Reagan. It was always Dutch. He got that nickname from his father when he was born in Tampico. So did that nickname ever come up as throughout his years as the governor and as president?
Not really. As a matter of fact, I don't think anybody who knew him well as governor or as president really used that. It was really something that others early in his life had used. He got it because when he was a baby, he was a kind of a chubby baby, as I understand. And one of his father's friends said, look at that little guy. He looks like a little Dutchman." And that was how that name Dutch stuck during his younger days and through his college days. But from the time that he was governor, certainly, from then on, I don't know of anybody who really used that from day-to-day parlance.
Now to keep going with that, was there? I know as the governor and as president, there probably aren't many nicknames you have for that person, but was there any nicknames that he had later on in life?
No, I think most people called him Mr. President, obviously. Maybe one or two people who were very, very close personal friends or relatives would call him Ron. But other than that, as I say, most people, including myself, I always called him Mr. President.
Well, and it sounds like his childhood shaped a lot of his life later on. I'm wondering if you remember any stories you might have told of growing up or from Eureka College.
Yes, he told me. As a matter of fact, I visited the apartment in Tampico where he was born, and it was amazing because I was born about 10 years later than him, but the style of the kitchen and all that sort of thing was pretty much the same as I remembered as a kid. But about his early, we heard a lot about his mother, particularly. She was a very good, very kind lady, doing things like taking food to the prisoners in jail, helping other people, very busy with the work of the church, all of those kinds of things. I remember his stories about that and his stories about, particularly when he was a student, about Eureka College, talking about being president of the student body there. And then the thing that I heard a lot about was his work as a lifeguard and saving people on the river there in the swimming hole. So all of these things were greatly kind of worked that in sometimes as examples of things he was trying to get across. He was not bragging. What he was really using that information to show a little bit about how he thought and what he wanted to do.
And you've said a lot about his honesty and his integrity and a strong sense of personal values. And I know he was a strong believer in building leadership in young people. And I'm wondering what advice you would have for college students who are looking to cultivate those similar values in their own life.
Well, I think following his example, for example, for illustration of getting along with others, respecting other people, but particularly the idea of hard work, and at the same time, not taking yourself too seriously. That's the humility that I mentioned. And being a reasonable person, being honest and living up to your word. If you say you're going to do something, you would be honor bound to do it and accomplish it, whatever it happened to be. I think these characteristics of a leader, these kinds of things that he illustrated in his own life are pretty good examples for people to follow.
So, Mr. Meese, I was wondering, did you see when you first started with him in the governorship, and then when he moved to like the last years of his presidency, 88, 89, what was the biggest change that you saw within Ronald Reagan?
Well, you know, it's interesting, but I don't think he did change that much. Certainly, I think he always lived up to the same ideals. He had the same philosophy of life, that sort of thing. If anything, it was the fact that he had vastly expanded his knowledge of things. He was an inveterate reader, and he read everything that was on a particular topic he was involved in. And so he knew an awful lot more at the end than he did at the beginning, but he was constantly learning. And I think all of this made him not only a good leader, but also a very deeply capable person in whatever he happened to be doing.
Now, there's a little, I don't know if it's a tale or whatever it would be, but that we always tell a little story at the birthplace about President Reagan having a photographic memory, because he started reading when he was like 3 or 4 years old, like really, really young. Did you ever hear about that now that you brought up all the reading and that he did?
Yes, he said that he read at a very early age, and many times his father would have a friend over, and he would surprise the friend by being able to read the newspaper at a very early age. And that was kind of a trick that his father liked to show off, if you would. One of the reasons why he was a reader, did a lot of reading, was they moved from town to town because his father had a hard time keeping a job. So when he lost a job, they had to move often to a new town where there was a job. And so as a result, he didn't have as a young kid much chance to make good friends, like having gone through several grades in school or something like that. And so what he did do was he would do a lot of reading. He'd go to the library and get a book and read it, then go back, take it back, get another book. And that's the way he kept on reading. And as he told me one time, he said, as long as you have books available, you'll always have a friend. And so that's why he was such an avid reader.
And I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, but you've had quite an illustrious career, Mr. Meese, and I'm wondering how working with President Reagan influenced your leadership style and how you interacted with your own teams as a leader.
Well, I think one thing that we both shared, we both really gained most of our leadership education in the Army. I was in the Army Reserve for 30 years, and he had been in the Army Reserve and then on active duty during World War II. And I think it was this idea of always taking care of your people, being clear in your communication, as well as standing behind the people that were working for you. And I think these are the qualities that we both shared from our military training, but I certainly you saw these in what he was doing as governor and president, and I hope, and also that ability to communicate well so that people understood what you were trying to do and understood why. I think these are the qualities of the leadership that I learned from him as well as from the Army.
You know, it's great, Mr. Meese, to hear you talk about how friendly he was and how he stuck to his values and stuck to his roots. I got to know his son Michael pretty well, and when he came to the birthplace quite a few years ago for his President Reagan's 100th birthday, he looked up at the apartment and he says, "You know, my dad never really left that room. He always stuck to his roots, and he goes, when I went up into that apartment, it reminds me exactly of the ranch after he was president." He said it was just always right down to the roots of his hometown. So it's great to hear you talk about how he carried that through all the way to the last years of his presidency.
Yes, he did, absolutely. And I think this was illustrated, his appreciation of the simple things of life is illustrated by the ranch house on his ranch. And that is, it was a very simple, very small ranch house. It was not some ornate or very luxurious type of place. And that's what he really loved. I always thought it must have been interesting to Gorbachev and to the Queen of England, Queen of United Kingdom, to come and see how he lived. For example, for the Queen, her idea of a leisure time place to go as kind of a refuge from the cares of the world, was Windsor Palace, Windsor Castle. For Ronald Reagan, it was this humble ranch house, and it was quite a contrast. Or with Gorbachev, the Dukies, the places he had in the woods, hunting lodges, that sort of thing. But for Ronald Reagan, it was a simple ranch house in the idea that he liked to work with his own hands, building fences, that sort of thing, even while he was president. In his spare time, when the very rare vacation time that he had out there, he would always be working around the ranch. And I think that characteristic showed the kind of person that he was, appreciating the simple things of life when he had the choice of almost anything he could do or any kind of situation he might want to be working in. So I think that was characteristic of the man.
Well, I've heard, switching gears, that there are two groups of people who had instant access to President Reagan anytime they were in Washington. And that is anyone from Eureka College and anyone who was a member of his beloved fraternity, the Teeks. Can you tell us the time when that happened?
Well, that's right. If someone was in town, either from the university, from the college, or a fellow brother, as he would call them, as a Teek, we would make sure that when we heard that they were coming, we would make sure we cleared his calendar, because that was a priority visitor as far as he was concerned. And he maintained that it was typical of what was important to him. And that's why the college and his fraternity were extremely important, because that had been part of his formative years when he was a student and when he was a young leader. And so I think he treasured that and gave proper ability to meet with them whenever they were in town. So you're right. The stories you've heard are correct. And we always knew if they were in town that we should be sure the time was available for him to meet with them.
We've talked about President Reagan's style of leadership, and yours, we've touched on yours, but I wonder if you might have some words of advice for the current students at Eureka College and the Reagan Fellows.
Well, I think, as I said before, working hard, always having an idea of where you want to go, which may change, particularly at the age of students. Your ideas from when you became a student at the college to the time you have graduate, probably your ideas change as to what you want to do. But I think the basic, kind of the fundamental ideas of being honest, working hard, carrying out what you say you're going to do, and those kinds of things always benefit anybody, whether they go to college or not. These are the kinds of situations, the uh, kind of things to follow, which would help anybody in any situation, but particularly for students, where you have such a great field of opportunity ahead of you. It makes it important that you have these characteristics in order to make the most of those opportunities. So I think those are things I would keep in mind. And the idea that if you do work hard, you also need to have some time off, and also you can't take yourself too seriously. You've got to have this sense of humor, which includes a sense of humor about yourself. And I think all of these qualities make you not only a good student, but also a good friend to others. And obviously, college is a great time for making good friendships that will last the rest of your life. I know it has for me, it did for Ronald Reagan, and I'm sure it would be for the rest of the student body at Eureka.
That's great. So as we're kind of winding down here, I was wondering if there was anything that you wanted to talk about, if there was anything that you'd like to add that we haven't covered, talk about President Reagan, yourself, just anything at all.
Well, I think the main thing was, why was he such a great world leader? What did he do that marked him as one of the best presidents of the United States? And I think if you look at the main problems that he inherited when he became president and what he did, for example, he restored our economy from being in the depths of recession to starting the longest period of economic growth and peacetime in the history of the country. Secondly, he rebuilt our armed forces and our military capability and our intelligence capability, which led ultimately to the end of the Cold War, with the forces of freedom winning and the implosion of the Soviet Union. And thirdly, from the time when we were in the depths of concerns that people had, worries, and people wondered if the United States could survive as it had in the past, he would revive the spirit of the American people. So these three things, the economic, the national security, and the spirit of the American people, these accomplishments there is a record for any president to have accomplished in the 8-year period that he served as our national leader.
That's wonderful. This has been such an honor to chat with you today. And I want to thank you personally for telling us some stories and sharing advice and facts on Ronald Reagan. Appreciate it.
I enjoyed talking with you, and I wish you and the people that are working there with you at the university wish you well in the future. I think Eureka, with Ronald Reagan's the experience that Ronald Reagan had there, is a great thing for people and for the future. It's a great place to go to college, and it's a great place from which you could go on to do great things as he did.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Meese. I think Eureka College and everybody in the community here is really going to enjoy this interview here. So thank you so much again for joining us and sharing all these stories.
You're very welcome.